Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the shadow of the Ozark Mountains, where the mist hangs heavy like a burial shroud, there exists a collection of documents that few have ever seen. These papers, weathered, stained, and bearing the unmistakable scent of decades past, tell a story that defies rational explanation. According to local historians, these records were discovered in 1963 during the demolition of an abandoned property near the small settlement of Blackwater Creek. The discovery was reportedly made by a construction worker who promptly turned the materials over to the County Historical Society. What happened to that worker remains a subject of speculation, as he reportedly left the region shortly thereafter. The documents detail events beginning in 1869, when the scattered homesteads and isolated communities of the Ozarks existed in near complete isolation from the outside world. The Civil War had ended just 4 years prior, leaving the region broken and distrustful. It was in this atmosphere of suspicion and hardship that Minerva Holloway arrived in the area. According to county records dated September 12, 1869, Minerva purchased a parcel of land approximately 7 miles from the nearest settlement. The records indicate she was a widow, though no information about her deceased husband appears in any available documentation. What makes this purchase unusual was not merely that a lone woman acquired property in such a remote location, but that she paid for it entirely in gold coins of Spanish origin. The clerk who recorded the transaction noted the unusual currency, but asked no questions, an attitude that characterized the relationship between Minerva and the larger community for decades to come. The homestead itself sat nestled against the northern face of Bald Knob Ridge, partially obscured by a dense growth of oak and hickory trees. A narrow, winding path served as the only access point, becoming nearly impassable during the winter months and spring rains. This isolation was, by all accounts, precisely what Minerva desired. She arrived with nothing but 3 trunks and reportedly constructed her cabin single-handedly within the span of 2 months, an achievement that raised eyebrows but generated little direct inquiry. In the words of Zachariah Pierce, whose journal entries from 1870-1873 provide some of the only contemporary accounts, "The woman from elsewhere keeps to herself, which suits the valley folk just fine. Some matters are best left unexamined." For the first year, Minerva's presence remained a peripheral concern for the scattered families of the region. She appeared at the general store in Blackwater Creek approximately once per month, purchasing only basic supplies, salt, coffee, ammunition, and occasionally fabric. She spoke little, paid promptly, and departed without lingering. According to the store's ledger, which survived a fire in 1892 and was later preserved by the Historical Society, Minerva never purchased food items beyond coffee and salt, a detail that would later factor into the growing unease surrounding her presence. The pattern of Minerva's first year in the Ozarks established what would become her reputation: self-sufficient, reserved, and existing at the margins of community awareness. This changed in November of 1870, when Augustus Hargrave, a trapper known for his extensive knowledge of the region's most remote areas, encountered Minerva deep in the woods nearly 15 miles from her homestead. Augustus's account, preserved in a letter to his brother dated November 28, 1870, describes finding Minerva kneeling beside a peculiar arrangement of stones at the base of an ancient sycamore tree. The arrangement, which Augustus described as not natural to the land, nor placed by any Indian tribe I've encountered, consisted of 7 stones of nearly identical size, positioned in a pattern that Augustus claimed made my eyes strain to follow. Most disturbing was Augustus's observation that Minerva appeared to be speaking to someone, though no other person was visible in the clearing. Upon noticing Augustus's presence, Minerva reportedly stood, smiled, and said only, "You've come earlier than expected. The others will follow." Augustus, unsettled by both the encounter and Minerva's words, departed quickly. His letter to his brother concludes with a statement that would prove eerily prescient. "I shall avoid the north woods hereafter, and would counsel others to do the same. Some places are not meant for wandering eyes." 3 weeks after this encounter, Augustus Hargrave disappeared. His trapping equipment was discovered by a search party near Coldwater Spring, approximately 3 miles from where he had encountered Minerva. No other trace of Augustus was ever found. The official record, documented by the county sheriff in January 1871, attributed his disappearance to the common hazards of frontier life, noting that wild animals, treacherous terrain, or hostile individuals may have contributed to the regrettable outcome. This marked the beginning of a pattern that would repeat with unsettling regularity over the subsequent decades. Each year, typically between the months of October and December, a single individual from the surrounding region would vanish without explanation. In each case, the person had reported some form of unusual encounter with Minerva Holloway in the weeks preceding their disappearance. And in each case, official investigations yielded no concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Between 1871 and 1875, 4 additional people disappeared: Josephine Barrow, a midwife known for collecting herbs in the northern woods; Prescott Walsh, a land surveyor working for a nascent railroad company; Cassandra Ingram, the daughter of a prominent local family; and Obadiah Marsh, a traveling minister. In each case, the pattern remained consistent: an encounter with Minerva, unusual behavior in the days or weeks following, and then vanishing without a trace. The community's response to these disappearances evolved gradually from concern to suspicion to a type of resigned acceptance. As Zachariah Pierce wrote in his final journal entry, dated June 1873, "There exists in this valley an understanding that certain questions remain unasked and certain places remain unvisited. This is not cowardice, but wisdom." What prevented direct action against Minerva remains a subject of historical debate. Some documents suggest practical concerns, lack of evidence, the remoteness of her property, and the general lawlessness that characterized the post-war Ozarks. Other accounts hint at something more insidious, a pervasive fear that extended beyond rational explanation. A letter dated 1874, written by the wife of the general store owner and addressed to her sister in St. Louis, offers this cryptic observation. "Thaddeus claims he saw her in town on Tuesday last, purchasing salt and twine. Yet on that same morning, Abigail Winters swears she encountered the same woman nearly 30 miles distant, gathering strange red berries that grow nowhere else in these parts." When I mentioned this contradiction to Thaddeus, he refused further discussion and has not spoken of the woman since. By 1876, Minerva Holloway had resided in the Ozarks for 7 years. 7 people had vanished, and according to tax records, Minerva's property had expanded 7-fold, though no one recalled her purchasing additional land. The records simply reflected new boundaries, as if they had always existed. It was in this year that the first documented attempt to directly investigate Minerva occurred. Winslow Sullivan, whose brother had disappeared in 1875, assembled a group of 5 men to visit Minerva's homestead. According to an account written by Jeremiah Quinn, one of the participants, the group departed at dawn and followed the narrow path to Minerva's cabin. Jeremiah's account, preserved in fragmented form, describes their arrival. "The clearing appeared before us suddenly, as if the forest simply decided to recede. The cabin sat in the center, larger than reports had suggested, with smoke rising from 2 stone chimneys. What struck us immediately was the silence. No birds called, no insects hummed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. According to Jeremiah, Minerva emerged from the cabin before they had announced themselves. She stood on the porch, wearing a dress of dark material that Jeremiah described as moving slightly, even in the absence of breeze. Most unsettling was Jeremiah's description of Minerva herself. Her appearance defied certainty. At moments she seemed a woman of middle years, her hair dark and her stance robust. Yet when she turned or stepped partially into shadow, I glimpsed something else, something older and decidedly unwell. Winslow allegedly confronted Minerva directly about the disappearances, specifically mentioning his brother. According to Jeremiah, Minerva's response was both cryptic and disturbing. "Your brother understood the exchange. One life freely given sustains many others. He saw beyond the veil and recognized the necessity." What happened next remains unclear as Jeremiah's account becomes increasingly fragmented and contradictory. He describes the men attempting to enter the cabin, only to find themselves turned around and walking in circles, despite the clearing's small size. He mentioned sounds emanating from beneath the cabin, not animal, not quite human, and a sudden, overwhelming scent like overripe fruit and freshly turned soil. The men reportedly fled, though Jeremiah's account suggests they experienced unusual difficulties finding their way back to the main road, despite having followed a single path to the property. Most disturbing is Jeremiah's claim that upon reaching the road, they discovered it was sunset, meaning nearly 10 hours had passed during what felt to the men like an expedition of no more than 2 hours. 2 days after this confrontation, Winslow Sullivan vanished from his home. According to his wife's statement to the sheriff, Winslow awoke in the middle of the night, claiming he heard someone calling his name from the edge of their property. He went to investigate and never returned. The remaining 4 men, including Jeremiah Quinn, refused to participate in the search party. Within 6 months, all 4 had left the region permanently. Jeremiah's account concludes with a warning. What dwells in the north woods wears the appearance of a solitary woman, but this is merely the face it presents to our limited understanding. I believe now that Minerva Holloway arrived in this region because something was already waiting for her, something ancient that had resided in these mountains long before human settlement. I write this not to encourage investigation, but to urge complete and permanent avoidance. Following the failed confrontation of 1876, direct interference with Minerva Holloway ceased entirely. The annual disappearances continued with mechanical precision, 1 person each year, always preceded by an encounter with Minerva, always occurring between October and December. Local authorities maintained official investigations for each disappearance until approximately 1885, after which reports become perfunctory, often consisting of a single page acknowledging the missing person and concluding with some variation of "no evidence of foul play discovered." This shift coincided with the appointment of Bartholomew Jenkins as county sheriff, a man who, according to multiple sources, expressly forbidden his deputies from entering the northern woods under any circumstances. A partial transcript of a town meeting held in January 1886 includes a confrontation between a citizen named Mordecai Williams, whose cousin had disappeared the previous November, and Sheriff Jenkins. According to the transcript, Williams demanded to know why no thorough search had been conducted near the Holloway property. Jenkins's response, as recorded by the town clerk, was uncharacteristically blunt. There exists in this county an arrangement of long-standing. Periodic sacrifices ensure collective prosperity. 1 life freely given each year guarantees abundant harvests, healthy livestock, and protection from the diseases that ravage neighboring counties. This arrangement predates my appointment, predates your arrival in this community, and quite possibly predates the founding of our nation. I suggest you direct your grief elsewhere, as it will find no remedy in this discussion. No further questions about Minerva Holloway or the disappearances appear in town records after this meeting. Moreover, references to Minerva in private correspondence and journals declined precipitously after 1886, as if a collective decision had been made to excise her from community consciousness. The county agricultural records from 1870 to 1900 present a disturbing correlation that lends credence to Sheriff Jenkins's statements. Following each disappearance, the subsequent growing season showed dramatically improved yields compared to neighboring counties. Livestock birth rates increased, and instances of common illnesses decreased. These patterns were consistent enough that an agricultural report from 1894 specifically notes, "The prosperity of Blackwater County defies conventional explanation, particularly given the poor quality of soil throughout much of the region." Some local factor as yet unidentified appears to grant this area significant advantages over adjacent territories. By the turn of the century, Minerva Holloway had resided in the Ozarks for over 30 years, yet descriptions of her appearance remained remarkably consistent. Those who encountered her, primarily individuals who would later disappear, described a woman of indeterminate middle age, with dark hair and unusually pale skin. A journal entry from 1899 written by Phineas Gardner shortly before he vanished provides this observation. "I encountered the woman from the North Woods at Coldwater Spring yesterday. Though I have lived in this region for nearly 20 years, our paths have never crossed until now." What struck me was not merely her sudden appearance beside the water, but the sense that I was looking at something that merely approximated human form, like a skilled artist's rendering that captures the outline but misses some essential quality of life. Phineas's journal continues, "She asked me a single question. 'Do you understand the nature of sacrifice?' Before I could respond, she placed her hand on the surface of the spring, and I swear by all I hold sacred that the water ceased its movement, becoming as still as glass, despite the current that feeds it. She then said, 'Consider carefully before answering. Once offered, acceptance is irrevocable.' I fled without responding, yet I cannot escape the certainty that I will see her again." Phineas disappeared 3 weeks later. His journal was discovered in a hollow tree, approximately 1 mile from Minerva's property. The final entry, dated the day of his disappearance, contains only a single line. "I understand now, and I go willingly." Between 1900 and 1920, the pattern established in previous decades continued without significant deviation. Each year, one person disappeared. Each disappearance was preceded by an encounter with Minerva. Official investigations remained perfunctory at best. The agricultural prosperity of the region continued to defy explanation, and Minerva herself remained a peripheral figure, rarely seen and even more rarely discussed. This period coincided with significant changes in the broader region. Improved roads reduced the isolation of many communities. Telephonic communication linked previously disconnected areas. Modern medicine diminished the impact of common illnesses. Yet Blackwater County maintained an unusual resistance to these changes, particularly in the northern areas closest to Minerva's property. As a regional development report from 1912 notes, the residents display a peculiar reluctance to adopt conveniences readily embraced by neighboring communities. Attempts to extend telephone lines beyond certain boundaries meet with vandalism or quiet sabotage. Proposed road improvements are voted down consistently. The community appears committed to maintaining a degree of isolation that most similar regions actively seek to overcome. The most significant disruption to the established pattern occurred in 1918, during the global influenza pandemic. While surrounding counties experienced devastating mortality rates, Blackwater County reported not a single death from the disease. A public health official who visited the region in December 1918 wrote, "The absence of influenza in this community defies medical explanation. When questioned, residents attribute their good fortune to local protections, but refuse to elaborate further. One elderly woman, speaking in confidence, referenced the arrangement and the woman in the woods before being silenced by her son. The same report includes a disturbing observation. Though influenza appears absent, I encountered numerous individuals displaying unusual physical symptoms inconsistent with any recognized disease. These include darkened veins visible beneath the skin, particularly around the eyes and mouth, episodes of rigid immobility during which the affected person appears conscious but completely unresponsive, and a peculiar odor reminiscent of soil and decaying vegetation. When I attempted to examine one such individual, I was firmly escorted to the county line and advised not to return. The disruption to the established pattern became apparent in October 1918, when two individuals disappeared within a single week: Ezekiel Rhodes, a carpenter, and Millicent Howell, a teacher at the local school. Both had reportedly encountered Minerva in the days preceding their disappearances. This deviation from the one-per-year pattern generated significant tension within the community, as evidenced by fragmentary accounts in personal correspondence from the period. A letter from Eudora Winthrop to her cousin, dated November 1918, contains this observation. Something has disturbed the equilibrium. The woman has taken two before the proper time, and there is considerable debate about how to proceed. Some advocate direct intervention, though none will speak openly of what form this might take. Others counsel patience, suggesting that extraordinary times may require extraordinary measures. What remains unspoken, yet understood by all, is the fear that the arrangement itself may be in jeopardy. By December 1918, the situation appears to have reached a crisis point. Town records indicate an unusual meeting was held on the night of December 12th, attended by 12 prominent citizens, including Sheriff Matthias Grant, who had replaced Jenkins in 1908, Judge Ephraim Cowell, and Dr. Solomon Pierce. No official record of this meeting exists, but a personal journal belonging to Dr. Pierce contains a cryptic entry dated December 13th. The delegation has been selected. 7 will go, as tradition dictates. Whether any will return remains an open question. The offering will be substantial, the largest in living memory. May it suffice to restore balance. On December 15, 1918, 7 individuals departed Blackwater Creek, heading north toward Minerva's property. According to multiple sources, they carried with them a wooden chest, the contents of which remain unspecified in any surviving documentation. None of the 7 returned. Their names appear in the county death register with the cause listed uniformly as misadventure. The influenza pandemic reached Blackwater County 3 days later, on December 18, 1918. Unlike surrounding regions, however, the impact was brief and relatively mild, with only 12 reported deaths, exactly matching the number of individuals who had disappeared in the county each year since Minerva's arrival. By January 1, 1919, the outbreak had subsided completely. The events of late 1918 appear to have reset the established pattern. Throughout the 1920s, the annual disappearances resumed their previous regularity, 1 person per year, always between October and December. Agricultural prosperity returned to its previous levels, and Minerva Holloway maintained her isolation, appearing rarely and engaging with the community only when necessary. What changed, however, was the community's relationship to the arrangement. Earlier decades had been characterized by reluctant acceptance and avoidance. Following the events of 1918, a more active participation emerged. Town records from 1920 through 1930 contain obscure references to a selection committee that met annually in September. No explicit description of this committee's purpose exists, but circumstantial evidence strongly suggests its function was to determine which community member would join the bloodline, a euphemism that appears with increasing frequency in private correspondence during this period. A diary belonging to Perpetua Wharton, wife of the general store owner, includes this entry from September 1923. The committee met last evening in the back room of the store. The discussion lasted until well past midnight. Prudence Blackwood's name was raised repeatedly, given her recent widowhood and lack of dependents. Tobias Remington advocated for considering volunteers only, but his suggestion gained little traction. The matter remains unresolved, though time grows short. The woman will be expecting her visitor before the first frost. 2 weeks after this entry, Prudence Blackwood disappeared. The sheriff's report consists of a single paragraph, acknowledging her absence and concluding that no investigation is warranted at this time. Prudence's property, including a small house and 2 acres of land, was absorbed into the holdings of Judge Cowell, who had chaired the selection committee that September. This pattern of property redistribution following disappearances became increasingly systematic throughout the 1920s. Those selected invariably possessed some material assets, land, livestock, or financial resources, which were subsequently distributed among prominent community members, often those serving on the selection committee. This arrangement, which essentially transformed the annual disappearance into a mechanism for wealth redistribution, appears to have consolidated the community's investment in maintaining the status quo. By 1930, the selection process had developed elaborate, though unwritten, guidelines. A partial account from Thaddeus Wharton, who served on the committee from 1925 until 1933, provides some insight. Candidates must meet specific criteria: adult age, reasonably sound health, and possession of transferable assets. Family connections within the county are considered a disqualifying factor, as such selections tend to generate unnecessary complications. Ideal candidates are recent arrivals, especially those without established relationships in neighboring communities. The explanation provided to candidates varies according to their disposition, though all are given to understand that their participation will ensure the prosperity of the region for the coming year. Thaddeus's account continues, "Most troubling are those who accept their selection with unusual enthusiasm. These individuals often report dreams or visions involving the woman, suggesting she has established contact prior to the official approach. Such candidates invariably go willingly, often expressing the conviction that they have been chosen for some transcendent purpose. Whether this conviction reflects genuine understanding or a form of induced delusion remains unclear. What cannot be disputed is the fact that none return, regardless of their initial attitude toward selection." The Great Depression, which devastated much of rural America beginning in 1929, had remarkably little impact on Blackwater County. While bank failures and foreclosures ravaged surrounding areas, local agricultural production remained stable, and the regional bank maintained its solvency. A federal assessment conducted in 1933 noted, "The economic resilience of this particular community presents a statistical anomaly warranting further investigation. Resources appear adequate, employment remains relatively stable, and instances of malnutrition or associated illnesses fall significantly below regional averages. Local officials attribute this stability to conservative financial practices and community cohesion, although these explanations fail to account fully for the observed outcomes." The report further notes, "Of particular interest is the apparent absence of transient populations that characterize similar communities during this period of economic distress. When questioned, local law enforcement indicated that wanderers are discouraged from lingering through unspecified methods. This policy appears effectively enforced, as no vagrant encampments or similar gatherings were observed within county boundaries." What the report fails to mention, but local records suggest, is that the annual selection during the Depression years often focused on these very transients, individuals whose disappearances would generate no external inquiry. Sheriff Atticus Blackwood, who served from 1931 until 1945, maintained a separate ledger documenting the detention of suspicious itinerants. Each year, one such detention concluded with a simple notation, "Released to the custody of the committee." No further information about these individuals appears in any official record. The arrangement might have continued indefinitely had external forces not intervened. In 1942, following America's entry into World War II, the War Department identified the northern Ozarks as a suitable location for military training exercises. Despite strenuous objections from local officials, federal surveyors arrived in Blackwater County in March 1943 with orders to map the region in preparation for possible maneuver grounds. The survey team consisted of 7 individuals led by Captain Nathaniel Foster. According to their mission parameters, they were to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the northern portion of the county, with particular attention to an area approximately 15 square miles that included Minerva Holloway's property. Fragmentary records from the survey team's radio communications indicate they established a base camp approximately 3 miles south of Minerva's property on March 15, 1943. Regular reports continued until March 18th, when Captain Foster reported discovering an unusual structure inconsistent with regional architectural styles near the coordinates corresponding to Minerva's cabin. Foster's final transmission, received at 15:47 hours on March 18th, contained this observation. Structure appears significantly older than reported. Construction methods suggest pre-colonial origins, possibly European. Interior investigation commencing. Strange odor present, possibly chemical or biological agent. Team experiencing disorientation and minor visual disturbances. Request immediate. The transmission ended abruptly. No further communications were received from the survey team. A military search and rescue operation began on March 20th, involving 3 12-man teams with air support. The search continued for 7 days, covering the entire 15-square-mile area multiple times. No trace of the survey team was discovered. The final report, partially declassified in 1962, concludes, "Extensive search operations failed to locate personnel or equipment. Topographical features of the region, including dense forest cover and numerous karst formations, may account for the team's disappearance. Possibility of hostile civilian action considered but deemed unlikely given lack of evidence." An addendum to the report, authored by Colonel Wilson Chambers, includes this observation. Local cooperation during search operations was notably inadequate. Guides provided by county authorities repeatedly led search teams away from the northern quadrant despite explicit instructions. When confronted, these individuals claimed to be turned around or confused by similar terrain features. Mo'laora. Direct oversight of guide personnel is recommended should operations in this region continue. The military's presence in Blackwater County continued sporadically until June 1943, when the War Department abruptly abandoned plans for using the region as a training ground. A classified memorandum from General Richard Hollister to the Secretary of War, dated June 12, 1943, offers this explanation. Persistent equipment malfunctions, unexplained personnel illness, and navigation difficulties render the proposed site unsuitable for military purposes. Alternative locations in adjacent states offer comparable terrain features without the operational complications encountered in this region. The military's withdrawal restored the status quo in Blackwater County, but the disruption had lasting consequences. The annual selection resumed in October 1943, but accounts suggest the process had become more difficult. A journal entry from Ephraim Waitley, who served on the committee from 1940 until 1947, notes, "The federal intrusion has unsettled the arrangement. Where previously we selected from willing or unattached individuals, We now find ourselves with limited options. Worse, the woman herself appears disturbed. Cornelius reported seeing her in the village yesterday, the first such sighting in nearly 7 years. She spoke to no one, but left a dead crow on the steps of the courthouse. The implications require no elaboration. Between 1943 and 1950, the annual disappearances continued, but contemporary accounts suggest a shift in the pattern. Rather than individuals selected by the committee, those who vanished increasingly included prominent community members, often individuals who had themselves served on the selection committee in previous years. Sheriff Atticus Blackwood disappeared in December 1945, followed by Judge Malachi Stern in November 1946, and Dr. Ezekiel Williams in October 1947. A letter from Thaddeus Whately to his son, dated December 1948, contains this warning. The arrangement has inverted. The woman now selects from among those who previously selected others. There exists no protection from consideration, neither wealth, position, nor previous service guarantees exemption. Some speak of abandoning the county entirely, but such attempts have uniformly failed. Those who depart find themselves returning without clear recollection of their intentions. We have sown the wind and now reap the whirlwind. The situation reached a crisis point in 1951 when 3 prominent citizens disappeared within a single month: Mayor Josiah Blackwood, Reverend Obadiah Winters, and Postmaster Thaddeus Whately himself. Following these disappearances, the county records office burned under mysterious circumstances, destroying most official documentation from the previous 80 years. The fire's origin was never determined, though the local newspaper quoted Fire Chief Phineas Sullivan as stating, "Some things aren't meant to leave evidence." The destruction of records coincided with a noticeable shift in the community's collective attitude toward its history. Longtime residents began to leave successfully, unlike earlier attempts, often relocating to distant states. Newcomers arrived, attracted by unusually affordable property, and encountered a community reluctant to discuss its past. By 1955, approximately 40% of the county's population consisted of individuals who had arrived within the previous 5 years. This demographic shift might explain the events of October 1955, when a group of newcomers, led by Harrison Reynolds, a businessman from Chicago who had purchased the general store 18 months earlier, organized an expedition to the abandoned property in the northern woods. According to an account published in the county newspaper, Reynolds had heard rumors about the property and, being of a curious disposition, decided to investigate. The expedition consisted of Reynolds and 4 other men, none of whom had resided in the county for more than 3 years. They departed on the morning of October 15, 1955, equipped with hunting rifles and provisions for a day's journey. None returned. The search party, organized reluctantly by Sheriff Malachi Stern, grandson of the judge who had disappeared in 1946, reportedly followed the trail to the clearing where Minerva's cabin had stood. What they found, according to the sheriff's official report, was an overgrown clearing containing no structures or evidence of previous habitation. The area appears undisturbed for a considerable period, with mature vegetation throughout. No sign of Reynolds or his companions was discovered. This official finding contradicts multiple unofficial accounts, including a letter sent by Phineas Whately, grandson of Thaddeus, to a university professor in 1960, which describes what the search party actually discovered. The cabin remained larger than in previous accounts and exhibiting impossible architectural features. Most disturbing was the front door, which, according to 3 independent witnesses, opened onto a space that continued beyond what the structure's dimensions should permit. Inside, they discovered evidence of recent occupation, still warm ashes in the fireplace, and fresh blood on what appeared to be a stone altar in the central room. Most significant was the discovery of personal effects belonging to individuals who had disappeared over the previous 80 years, arranged in what one witness described as a genealogical display, like a family tree rendered in objects rather than names. Phineas's letter continues, "The sheriff ordered the cabin burned. When the flames failed to spread beyond the porch, he ordered the men to depart and subsequently declared the search concluded. Within 6 months, he had relocated to Arizona, leaving no forwarding address. Of the 11 men who participated in the search, 7 have since left the county. The remaining 4 refused to discuss what they observed. The period from 1955 to 1962 represents the final chapter in the documented history of Minerva Holloway and the arrangement. Annual disappearances continued, though with decreasing regularity. Local prosperity, which had defied regional economic trends for nearly a century, began to decline. The County Agricultural Report from 1960 notes, crop yields have decreased by approximately 30% over the previous 5 years. Livestock fertility rates show similar declines. These changes cannot be attributed to weather patterns, soil conditions, or farming practices, all of which remain consistent with historical norms. The community's relationship to its past became increasingly fraught during this period. Longtime residents avoided discussing certain topics, particularly with newcomers. Local schools taught a sanitized version of county history that made no mention of Minerva Holloway or the pattern of disappearances. The northern section of the county was designated a watershed protection area and declared off-limits to development or recreation, a designation that appears to have been respected despite the absence of any enforcement mechanism. The final documented disappearance occurred in December 1962 when county historian Verity Blackwood vanished while researching material for a commissioned history of the region. According to her assistant, Verity had discovered a hidden compartment in the foundation of the rebuilt county records office containing documents that had survived the 1951 fire. The nature of these documents was never disclosed, as they disappeared along with Verity. 3 months after Verity's disappearance, in March 1963, a construction worker named Jeremiah Sullivan discovered a collection of papers, photographs, and small objects while demolishing an abandoned property approximately 5 miles from the location of Minerva's cabin. Sullivan turned these materials over to the State Historical Society rather than local authorities, a decision that likely preserved them from destruction. These materials, which form the basis for this account, include fragments of journals, letters, official documents, and photographs spanning nearly a century. The collection also contained several unusual items: a lock of dark hair tied with faded red ribbon, a leather pouch containing teeth, apparently human but unusually shaped, and a small carved stone figure depicting a woman with elongated limbs and no facial features. Most significant was a journal, allegedly written by Minerva Holloway herself, though the authenticity of this document remains contested. The journal, which covers the period from 1859 to 1867, predating her arrival in the Ozarks, describes her discovery of what she terms the lineage in a remote valley in Massachusetts. According to the journal, Minerva encountered an elderly woman living alone in an ancient stone house, who revealed to her the method by which human essence may be harvested and redistributed to sustain multiple lives across extended duration. The journal's final entry, dated January 1867, reads, "The authorities grow suspicious, and I must relocate. The crone suggested regions to the west, where ancient presences still linger in remote valleys. I have identified a suitable location in the mountains called Ozark, where the boundary between worlds thins appropriately. I shall establish myself there and continue the work. The lineage must not end." Following the discovery of these materials, a graduate student named Martin Chambers from the State University attempted to conduct field research in Blackwater County during the summer of 1965. His dissertation proposal outlined a plan to investigate local folklore and oral traditions, with particular emphasis on unusual demographic patterns and economic anomalies. Chambers arrived in June 1965 and established residence in a boarding house operated by Patience Whately, great-granddaughter of Thaddeus. His field notes, preserved in the university archives, document increasing difficulties as his research progressed. Initial interviews yielded only superficial information, with subjects repeatedly steering conversations away from historical topics. Attempts to access local records encountered bureaucratic obstacles, and his inquiries about the northern section of the county were met with what he described as unified resistance bordering on hostility. Most disturbing are Chambers' notes from late July, in which he describes being followed by unidentified individuals whenever he ventured beyond the town center. He also reports experiencing unusual auditory phenomena, particularly at night, sounds that he initially attributed to the unfamiliar forest environment, but later came to believe were purposeful communications of non-animal origin. Chambers' final journal entry, dated August 3, 1965, reads, "Have obtained directions to the Holloway property from P.W., presumably Patience Whately, who provided them reluctantly after considerable persuasion. She insisted I wait until October when the transition is easiest, but academic timeline necessitates immediate investigation. Departing at dawn. Should return by nightfall." Chambers never returned to the boarding house. A search, organized by the county sheriff, only after pressure from university officials, concluded that Chambers had likely become disoriented in unfamiliar terrain and perished from exposure or accidental injury. Huaquias, his body was never recovered. The university subsequently abandoned the research project. Chambers' dissertation advisor, in a letter to the department chair, wrote, "I cannot in good conscience send another student to this location." Whatever Martin encountered in Blackwater County posed dangers beyond ordinary research risks. I recommend formal classification of the region as unsuitable for field studies, with appropriate warnings in departmental guidelines. The final chapter in the documented history of Minerva Holloway comes from an unexpected source. In September 1968, a geological survey team investigating karst formations in the northern Ozarks captured a series of aerial photographs that included the area where Minerva's property had been located. Most of these photographs show only dense forest canopy, but one image, taken from an oblique angle during late afternoon, reveals what appears to be a clearing containing a structure. When enlarged, the photograph shows a cabin substantially larger than described in historical accounts. Most notably, the structure appears to have multiple chimneys and extensions that create an asymmetrical floor plan, resembling, in the words of the geologist who first noticed the anomaly, a stick figure drawn by a child, a central structure with limb-like projections extending in multiple directions. The Geological Survey team submitted the photograph to their supervisors with a recommendation for ground-level investigation. This recommendation was denied without explanation, and the photograph was filed without further action. It remained in governmental archives until 1985, when a Freedom of Information request filed by the State Historical Society succeeded in obtaining a copy. By this time, Blackwater County had undergone significant changes. The construction of a regional highway in 1972 reduced the area's isolation. The economic downturn of the late 1970s prompted an exodus of younger residents seeking employment in urban centers, and development projects, including a reservoir created by damming Blackwater Creek in 1983, fundamentally altered the region's geography and character. The northern section of the county, which had remained largely untouched for over a century, was incorporated into a state forest preserve in 1980. Access was restricted to designated trails, none of which approached the location where Minerva's property had been situated. Forest Service maps from this period show the area as Ecological Research Zone, permit required, though no record exists of any research being conducted in this specific location. The most recent documented attempt to investigate the Minerva Holloway case occurred in 1967, when investigative journalist Ramona Sullivan, no relation to the Sullivan family of Blackwater County, began researching a book on forgotten historical mysteries of the Ozarks. Sullivan's notes, preserved at her alma mater's journalism archive, indicate she had uncovered references to the annual disappearances and intended to focus her book on this phenomenon. Sullivan visited Blackwater County in April 1967 and spent approximately 2 weeks conducting interviews and attempting to access local records. Her notes describe a community pathologically averse to historical inquiry and document numerous instances where interview subjects terminated conversations abruptly when certain topics were raised. Most intriguing is Sullivan's account of a conversation with an elderly woman identified only as MWW, possibly Matilda Whately, Thaddeus's daughter-in-law, who allegedly provided detailed information about the arrangement on the condition that Sullivan wait at least 30 years before publishing. According to Sullivan's notes, M.W. claimed that Minerva Holloway was not a single individual, but a role or vessel occupied by different women over time. M.W. allegedly explained, "When the current vessel grows weak, a successor is selected from among the bloodline, those whose ancestors were previously taken. The transition requires preparation and cannot be rushed. If interrupted, both vessels perish, and what they contain escapes. Such an escape would devastate the region, as occurred in 1718 following an unsuccessful transition in Massachusetts. The current vessel has occupied the role since 1923 and approaches the limits of containment. The next transition must occur soon, or restraint will fail." Sullivan's notes indicate she planned to visit the northern woods despite M.W.'s warnings against doing so before October. Her final journal entry, dated April 17, 1967, reads, "Meeting with Forest Service guide tomorrow morning at 8, EUA's 0. He claims to know a route to the clearing that avoids posted boundaries. Weather forecast favorable. Should return by late afternoon with photographs, if possible." Sullivan never returned from this expedition. The Forest Service had no record of employing a guide matching the description in her journal. A search was conducted 3 days later, after her rental car was found abandoned at a trailhead, but no trace of Sullivan was discovered. The case remains officially unsolved. In the decades since Sullivan's disappearance, Blackwater County has gradually integrated into the broader regional culture. Tourism, particularly outdoor recreation, has replaced agriculture as the primary economic driver. The population includes few individuals with familial connections to the area's early settlers, and the events described in this account have faded from public consciousness, preserved only in scattered documents and the carefully guarded memories of a dwindling number of elderly residents. Yet certain patterns persist. Forest rangers report unusual difficulties maintaining trails in the northern section of the preserve, with markers frequently disappearing and vegetation reclaiming cleared areas at accelerated rates. Electronic equipment, radios, GPS devices, cameras, experiences unexplained malfunctions in specific locations. And despite the region's popularity with hikers and campers, an area of approximately 5 square miles remains effectively unexplored, as visitors report feeling uncomfortable or unwelcome when approaching certain boundaries. Most telling is a statistical anomaly identified by a public health researcher in 2010, but never published in academic literature. According to this analysis, Blackwater County continues to experience one unexplained disappearance per year, typically involving hikers or campers who venture off marked trails. These disappearances occur with remarkable consistency between October and December. The Blackwater County Sheriff's Office maintains that these incidents reflect the inherent risks of wilderness recreation rather than any unusual pattern. When questioned about historical disappearances, current officials express skepticism about folklore and emphasize the department's commitment to modern investigative techniques. What actually transpired in the northern Ozarks between 1869 and the present may never be fully understood. The fragmented documentation, conflicting accounts, and active suppression of historical inquiry have created a narrative with significant gaps and uncertainties. Yet the consistency of certain elements across numerous independent sources suggests that something extraordinary occurred in this region, something that continues to influence the present in subtle but persistent ways. As Minerva Holloway purportedly wrote in her journal, "The lineage endures, only the vessels change." This cryptic statement perhaps offers the most concise explanation for a phenomenon that has persisted for over a century and a half. The woman in the Ozarks choosing one stranger each year to join the Macabre Bloodline appears not to be a single individual at all, but rather a succession of vessels, each containing something ancient and hungry that predates human settlement in the region. The true nature of joining the bloodline remains speculative. Early accounts suggest a simple exchange, one life sacrificed to ensure prosperity for many. Later documents hint at something more complex, a form of absorption or transformation, whereby the sacrificed individual becomes part of a collective entity that manifests through a human vessel. Most disturbing are the implications of Minerva's journal, which suggests that the entity sustained by these sacrifices is neither human nor benevolent, but rather an ancient presence that requires containment as much as nourishment. What cannot be disputed are the consequences of disturbing the arrangement. Historical records document multiple instances where interruptions to the annual cycle resulted in collective suffering, disease outbreaks, crop failures, and inexplicable accidents affecting the broader community. Conversely, adherence to the cycle corresponds with periods of unusual prosperity and health. This correlation persists despite changes in regional demographics, economics, and governance, suggesting a causal relationship that defies conventional explanation. The persistence of annual disappearances in the modern era raises troubling questions about the current state of the arrangement. Has the selection process simply adapted to contemporary circumstances, focusing now on isolated visitors rather than community members? Does someone, or something, still occupy Minerva's role, choosing those who will join the bloodline? Or has the entity evolved beyond the need for a human vessel, operating now through more subtle and pervasive mechanisms? A curious footnote to this narrative emerged in 2013, when a hiker reported encountering a solitary woman near one of the unmaintained trails in the Northern Preserve. According to the hiker's account, posted anonymously on a regional outdoor recreation forum, the woman appeared suddenly beside a small spring, wearing clothing inconsistent with typical hiking attire, more like a dress from another era. The woman reportedly asked the hiker, "Do you understand the nature of sacrifice?" before placing her hand on the surface of the spring, at which point the water allegedly ceased flowing. The hiker, disturbed by the encounter, departed quickly and claims to have experienced unusual difficulties finding the main trail despite having a GPS device. Most notable is the hiker's claim that what felt like 30 minutes of walking resulted in nearly 6 hours of lost time, according to their watch. The post concluded with the observation, "I keep having dreams about that woman. She's calling me back to the woods. I think I'm going to return next weekend to find that spring again. Something tells me I need to answer her question properly this time." The account was deleted approximately 48 hours after posting. Attempts by other forum members to contact the original poster received no response. A subsequent search of missing person reports for the region shows no obvious matches for the description provided in the post. However, Local news sources reported that an unidentified hiker's equipment was discovered abandoned near a trailhead in the Northern Preserve in October 2013. No trace of the owner was ever found. The story of Minerva Holloway and the Macabre Bloodline persists as one of the most disturbing cases in the documented history of the Ozarks. It challenges conventional explanations and raises unsettling questions about the nature of sacrifice, community complicity, and the ancient forces that may linger in remote places. For the residents of Blackwater County, it represents a history deliberately forgotten. For researchers and skeptics, it presents a puzzle with pieces that refuse to fit together coherently. And for those who venture into the northern woods between October and December, it serves as a warning that some places remain dangerous not because of what they contain, but because of what they might release if disturbed. As one of the last entries in Minerva's contested journal reads, "The hunger never ceases, the vessel merely contains, and the bloodline grows with each edition, strengthening what dwells within." To join is to surrender individuality for collective continuation. What was once many becomes one, and what was once one becomes many. This is the nature of the arrangement, not a sacrifice, but a transformation, not an ending, but an absorption into something far more ancient than human comprehension can encompass. The silence of the Ozarks conceals much, and perhaps that silence, maintained through community complicity and active suppression, serves a purpose beyond mere denial. Perhaps some truths are best left unspoken, some histories best left unexamined, and some woods best left unexplored, particularly as October approaches and the woman in the Ozarks prepares to choose once again. For those who find themselves near Blackwater County, wandering the forest trails during the early autumn months, a simple warning might prove life-saving. Should you encounter a solitary woman near a spring or stream, do not answer her questions. Do not linger to observe the stillness of water that should be flowing, and above all, do not return to seek her out, no matter how compelling the dreams that follow. For to join the Macabre Bloodline is to vanish not just from the world, but from memory itself, becoming merely another unremembered sacrifice in a pattern too ancient and terrible to comprehend fully. The northern woods wait, as they have waited for centuries. The clearing conceals its secrets beneath encroaching vegetation, and somewhere among the twisted trees and hidden hollows, a vessel continues its vigil, ensuring that what is contained remains contained, and what hungers continues to be fed. One stranger each year, chosen carefully, transformed completely, and absorbed eternally into the macabre bloodline that flows like dark water beneath the seemingly tranquil surface of the Ozarks. The boundaries between legend and history blur in cases like these. Perhaps no definitive truth can be established after so many decades of deliberate obfuscation. What remains are fragments, documents, testimonies, and unexplained patterns that hint at something operating beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. The woman in the Ozarks, whether Minerva Holloway or the succession of vessels that followed her, represents not merely a historical curiosity, but a fundamental question about what might exist in the spaces between established knowledge, ancient presences that persist despite our collective determination to deny their existence. As the sun sets over Blackwater County and darkness settles among the ancient oaks and hickories, the northern woods become a place where time itself seems to fold and bend. Those who venture too far from marked trails report experiencing temporal distortions, moments where minutes stretch into hours or compress into seconds. Some describe hearing voices calling from deep within the forest, voices that sound familiar, though they cannot place them. And in the deepest hollows, where the canopy blocks even midday light, some claim to have glimpsed a solitary figure moving between the trees, a woman whose appearance shifts with the changing shadows. The arrangement continues, the lineage endures, and somewhere in the northern Ozarks, beyond the reach of modern intrusion, a cabin stands that appears on no map, contains space that defies its external dimensions, and houses an entity that wears the accumulated faces of all who have joined the Macabre Bloodline. It waits, as it has always waited, for the next stranger who will answer the question, "Do you understand the nature of sacrifice?" The answer, it seems, can only be given in person, in that clearing where the forest recedes as if by conscious choice, before that cabin door that opens onto something far more vast and ancient than its humble exterior suggests. And those who provide the correct answer are never seen again, at least not in any form that those who knew them would recognize. They become part of something else, something that has existed in these mountains since before human settlement, something that requires containment as much as nourishment, something that continues to select one stranger each year to join the lineage that sustains it. The Macabre Bloodline flows through the history of the Ozarks like a dark current beneath the surface of a seemingly tranquil stream. Those who drink from it never return to tell what they tasted. But the prosperity that follows each sacrifice suggests a terrible bargain maintained across generations, one life freely given that many others might thrive, a transaction as old as human civilization, perhaps older still, conducted in the shadows of modern America with the same ritualistic precision that characterized its earliest iterations. In the autumn mist that shrouds the northern ridges, something watches and waits, and as October approaches, it begins to choose again, drawing its selected vessel toward that fateful clearing with dreams and whispers and promises of transformation. The bloodline continues, one stranger at a time, feeding something ancient and patient that dwells in the shadowed heart of the Ozarks.